Welcome to everybody officially. I'm Lindsay McGrath, and I'm in the Office of Alumni Relations and Development. Like I said, we had this tremendous response to this webinar, and it's been so exciting to see nearly 700 alums register to join us tonight. Kate Sondors Solomon is a cooking instructor based in the river towns along the Hudson River in Westchester. Growing up surrounded by delicious homemade food, her passion for cooking flourished during a transformative year studying in Florence, Italy. There, one of her host moms shared her love for Italian cuisine, creating a vibrant community in the kitchen filled with slow-cooked risotto, tiramisu, and fresh pasta. That sounds amazing. And now Kate continues this tradition through hands-on cooking classes for all ages, emphasizing a playful, down-to-earth approach that fosters connections in the kitchen. And whether teaching children or adults, she aims to make cooking joyful and an empowering experience. And particularly passionate about all forms of dough, pastas, breads, cakes, and tarts, Kate enjoys baking and decorating treats for her family. And her mission is to help others create delicious memories together in the kitchen. And I thought that was the perfect way to end and turn it over to you as we
Thank you.
create memories here.
So, guys, I just wanted to say before I get started, well, obviously, thank you for joining, but I don't know if it's weather, I'm a little hoarse today. So, just make sure if I'm not projecting enough, please let people know, let Lindsay know, and she'll make sure that you can hear me. So hopefully I'm not too squeaky. But I really appreciate being here. Thank you for having me back. I can't believe we already got 201 people on. It's incredible. I love doing this because I love Julia Child. It's a complete honor. I was telling Lindsay before you came on that when someone says to me, who's your hero? The first person that comes to mind is Julia. I try to model what I do after her in a lot of ways, just her joy for what she did, her passion, her humor. Those are all really important to me in my work. And I can't say I learned directly from her, but we'll just say I learned from the best. So I'm lucky to share alum status with Julia at Smith. So, and I'm going to talk about why I picked these two recipes. We're close to Thanksgiving, so Lindsay and I thought it would be appropriate to pick Thanksgiving related dishes. Someone asked early in advance if these were skewed more French or American, definitely more American, even though Julia was the French chef, she was American. And these are recipes from this book, Julia and Jacques Cooking at Home. So the cranberry sauce we're going to make is verbatim from the book. I took a few liberties on the cornbread stuffing. She has another stuffing that goes inside a lamb she makes, and I took a few bits and pieces from that and added it to this cornbread stuffing. I left out the mushrooms, which I think would be a good addition if you're vegetarian. But personally, I just thought with the cranberry sauce, it would flow better to leave out the mushrooms. And I made small changes. One being that I added some French breadcrumbs, which is something she does in one of her other stuffing recipes. So if you're a purist, my apologies. But I thought I'd adapt it for this class. So we're going to start with the stuffing and we're going to jump right in. I love to sort of prep everything before I get into the cooking. So the word mise en place comes up here. Mise en place means everything ready to go. So we're going to prep all our ingredients and create our mise en place before we start actually cooking. It makes the flow much better and much easier for you. So if you're sort of a newbie to the kitchen, that's a really great suggestion. Something I always tell new cooks, like have your recipe nearby and prep everything in advance before you actually start the cooking process. What I mean by cooking is not prepping, but heat. And the reason is you may get a little stressed out if you start cooking. For example, if you start cooking the sausage and then have to run back and cut your vegetables. So I'm going to get everything ready and then we're going to jump in. I know some of you are cooking along, some of you are just watching. So you're going to need cornbread. So hopefully you guys made that in advance or purchased a cornbread. I've got one here I made yesterday. You could see my son took a little bite out of it. So I have almost an entire cornbread here. We will be crumbling that. That is your main ingredient. I also have some bread hunks, bread crumbs from a French bread. I have celery. I have onion. We are going to need eggs, sage, chicken broth. Those are our main ingredients. So I'm going to start from the top. We're just going to prep all those ingredients and then we'll begin cooking. So you're going to want a tablespoon of canola oil and a tablespoon of butter. I sort of talk my way through recipes if you prefer to use all butter, or if you prefer to use all canola oil, or if you'd rather switch to olive oil or an avocado oil, do it. Recipes are like rules, they're meant to be broken. So feel free to break those rules if you're purist. Again, I've already adapted a bit, so sorry about that, guys. But if you are a purist, you know, Julia tended to go with butter. So you can use all butter there. So you're going to want to set that aside and you can set that near your stove. We're also going to want 1 pound, if you're not vegetarian, if you're using sausage, a pound of sausage meat removed from the casings. So oftentimes at grocery stores, you can get that already. They'll sell a pack of sausage without the casing. So you'll find that here, I actually removed these from the casings earlier. If you haven't done that, you may want to do that now. If you have an aversion to touching meat, I recommend wearing gloves while you do that. I'm going to set this aside. That is about a pound. You're going to need 2 cups of onions. 2 cups is equivalent to about 2 medium onions, maybe a large and a medium onion. I'm going to show you how to dice an onion. And I'm also going to show you how to dice celery. Some of it's already prepared because I didn't want you to stand there and feel like you have to watch me chop things for an hour. So I prepared a little bit in advance, but I wanted to show you technique for those of you who want to learn technique. So I'm going to jump forward to the celery and then jump back to the onion. Celery. So this is my favorite peeler. It's called a Y peeler. If you don't have one, I highly recommend it. It's my ride or die peeler. It is probably the ultimate kitchen tool in my eyes. It's so simple. It's so affordable. I'm happy to send you my favorite tools as well, including brands. This is called Spoon Raycon, my absolute favorite. It's lightweight. It's very easy to use. I actually start with my celery and I remove the fibrous bits. So this is just if your celery is a little more stringy. This isn't a mandatory step, but, and certainly not what Julia did in her recipe, but it sort of just makes the celery a little more delicate. You can do this with other vegetables as well that have that fibrous element to it. So I chop off the ends. And please let me know. I'm going to adjust my screen a little so you guys can see my chopping. And then I'll chop in half just to make them a little more easier to control. And then I'm going to flip them on their back and cut in half and then in quarters. And again, my way is not necessarily the right way. It's just my way. Keep that in mind. And then I'm going to dice. So someone asked me in some of the questions I was given in advance about how to chop with more, I don't remember if it was more efficiently or if it was more quickly, but I always tell my students, don't aim for speed, aim for safety and accuracy. I actually got yelled at the beginning of my culinary career for going too fast because my knife work was messy. So I would advocate going more slowly. You're less likely to hurt yourself. Never been a super fast chopper, even for a professional. All right. So I know some of you have probably prepped all of this in advance. Some of you maybe haven't done any of it and are trying to cook along. In which case I hope my speed is not too rapid. And then I know a lot of you are just watching. So again, feel free to chime in if you need me to slow down, because I can just keep talking. Lindsay, do you want to throw some of those questions at me?
Yeah, sure. So it was fun to see some of the questions that everyone submitted. There were questions specific to the dishes. Maybe we can start there. How to
Yeah,
store and repurpose the leftovers, if they can be. There was a few that came in about keeping these, keeping the relish refrigerated until Thanksgiving might be something good. And the question before was
sure.
tips on chopping quickly but safely. So your
Thank
answer
you.
was
That was
very
it.
appropriate.
So if you're a new cook, those are true opposites. So being a quick chopper takes a lot of skill and practice and time. I would not advocate for chopping quickly or considering that a skill necessarily. You know, you got your hot shots on the internet showing off their skills. I've never been a super fast knife skills person. I'm more reserved. I aim for safety, and possibly because I'm an instructor rather than working in a kitchen. I haven't done that in years. I was never fast. So again, my advice on that is aim for doing things accurately and safely, not necessarily quickly. And I'm going to answer your other question in a second, but I want to show you guys the chefy way to cut an onion. So some people, and we'll do it this way. I normally just chop off the root, but we're going to keep it intact today. So I cut off the other end. I'm removing the skin. If you find a layer under your skin that seems, I'm going to be using the word fibrous a few times here and there. If it feels fibrous or it's a little yellow, just kind of unappealing, just remove that. Not that it's not edible. By the way, all your scraps, these can be saved for a stock if that's your speed, if you like to reduce food waste, reuse. All this stuff is perfect for a vegetable or chicken stock. So here you go. So I'm going to go, you're kind of creating, I always say, a gingham pattern inside your onion. So I'm going and creating knife cuts, and I'm not going all the way to the end. I'm keeping that root intact. So how many times across depends on how small I want the knife cut. So then I'm going to go in from the side. So this is a medium to small onion, so I'll probably go in about 3 times. And then my last cut is going to be from the top. So the benefit of cutting an onion this way is the fewer knife cuts, the less tears. So if, I can also send you guys a video of somebody doing this if you want to practice. This is a really fun skill to learn if you're not familiar with cutting an onion this way. There are very few things that actually do stop the onion tears, but I am a big fan of, so you could see, I probably should have removed that top layer. Okay, the leftovers. I would not eat anything with meat cooked meat beyond 3 days. So if you're making the stuffing tonight and don't want to eat it tonight, I would eat it tomorrow, Friday, Saturday, and then the latest on Sunday. You could freeze it. I haven't actually frozen this particular stuffing. I feel like stuffing is best when fresh or made the day before. The relish, on the other hand, that can last a few weeks because you are essentially preserving, you're sort of creating a jam. So it's not shelf stable like a jam you would buy in the store, but because you're incorporating so much sugar, sugar is a type of preservative like salt, you can actually keep this, make it tonight and keep it for Thanksgiving. Um, so her recipe is a little different than your traditional cranberry sauce. It is a relish. Relishes tend to be a little tart. It's also got a little cayenne. If you're, we'll get to that later. If you're not into spice, just leave that out. I think there's some questions coming in. Do you see anything, Lindsay?
We did have a question about your lovely stack of cookbooks that we can
Oh,
see in the corner.
yes, there's always questions about.
After mastering the art of French cooking, which books would you recommend?
Well, of course, I have that right here. So these are not my only cookbooks. My living room, which is right next door to my kitchen, I've got like hundreds on a bookshelf. I'm a minimalist except for cookbooks. Great question. So great question with a long-winded response. So I teach kids cooking class. I teach every age, from basically 18 months until the end of one's life. I teach a lot of kids, so I tend to gravitate towards children's cookbooks a lot, which doesn't necessarily help you. But I've got a few here, like Melissa Clark's Kid in the Kitchen. As far as my favorite cookbook, I really love The Silver Spoon. It's an Italian cookbook. It's kind of the Bible of Italian cooking. I don't actually cook from it that often, but I love it as just a reference book. Sorry if I'm looking off to the side. This was the classic one growing up. I think my mom cooked from this 3 to 4 nights a week. So I have an extreme fondness for this cookbook, the Silver Palette cookbook. You cannot go wrong. Everything in here is amazing. I know there's a lot of you who agree with me. As far as classic, all my favorites are over here. It's, oh, you can't see it, the Farmer's Cookbook. So this is, someone signed it in 1983 for their friend. This is a pastry book from my absolute favorite bakery. It's in Portland, Maine, Standard Baking Company. If you are anywhere near Maine, run.
Okay.
And it's an amazing cookbook.
I love that.
But I could go on and on. I have many favorite cookbooks. Yes. So we're gonna crack some eggs, guys. I promise we'll actually start cooking soon. Woohoo, Portland, I see. Great city. Just went there for the first time a few years ago. Biggest regret is not going to Standard Baking more than once. But we tried like half the store because that's how my family operates. If we go somewhere, we order enough. We're just a family of 3 and we order enough food for 6 to 10 people. So you're going to crack a couple of eggs and you're going to whisk them. There's so many comments, guys. I wish I could read them all. Tell me some of your favorite cookbooks. So we've got our cornbread. So I'm going to go back a little. We've got our canola oil and butter set aside, our sausage meat. So again, mise en place here. About 2 cups of onions. We've got our celery stalk, 1.5 cups. Now we've got our cornbread. Why does she ask you to have it be a day old? Well, you want it to dry out so it doesn't bring the moisture into the stuffing. So if you make your cornbread that morning, oh shoot, I forgot, I need to get a fresh cornbread. One trick you can do is actually turn on your oven and maybe on 300 and pop it in there for 15 minutes and dry it out a little bit. So you're just gonna crumble that up. Once you mix it together, cornbread is very crumbly. So my friend had a Friendsgiving the other day, invited a bunch of friends over and she made a cornbread stuffing. And honestly, other than this one, I rarely make a cornbread stuffing. I tend to go for like brioche or I guess you would say more of a French spin on a stuffing. I know one of the questions that was sent my way too. What are my favorite Thanksgiving dishes? And one of them is a mushroom bread pudding, which is the most ridiculously labor intensive dish ever, but incredible. And I'm trying to remember the origin of it. It may have been my previous boss. It may be Molly O'Neill's recipe. She's a New York Times writer, and I helped her on one of her cookbooks, and I think that was her recipe. Amazing. Um, Other Thanksgiving recipes, I do love a traditional Thanksgiving. This year, I'm doing turkey legs instead of a whole turkey because if I'm going to make a turkey, I just find no matter what I do in the oven, the white meat is dry. I have other techniques, but I'm going to do just turkey legs and drumsticks this year. And I really love those. We all fight over those ultimately anyway. So why not make them for everyone attending? So I'm very excited about that. I love this butternut squash lasagna recipe. Again, not traditional Thanksgiving. Last year we did a French Thanksgiving. I made a Chateaubriand and potatoes gratin, one of my all-time favorite dishes ever. Um, and I don't use Julia's recipe. Sorry, Julia. I actually love Tyler Florence's recipe. It's very simple and super satisfying. And yeah, butternut squash lasagna. We did a steakhouse Thanksgiving 2 years ago where I made prime rib. So I kind of go in non-traditional ways for Thanksgiving. This year I wanted to do Peruvian, and my mom said absolutely not. I want all traditional dishes. So that's what I'm doing this year. But I'd say my butternut squash lasagna, potatoes gratin are probably my two favorite Thanksgiving dishes, plus that mushroom bread pudding, which again will take you an entire day of blood, sweat, and tears, but it's amazing. Okay, so I think our last ingredient we actually have to prep for this is the sage. And I'm looking at the time and we're good. So we need 2 tablespoons of thyme. I get asked a lot, or not thyme, sage, not thyme. You can use thyme if you prefer. I love sage. I feel like most people do, but there are those who don't. You can absolutely replace this with your herb of preference if you prefer thyme. You can even make this slightly Italian with an Italian sausage and, you know, add fennel, maybe a little hot red pepper. Sorry, Julia. I always do this. I always find ways to change other people's recipes because that's pretty much what I do for a living is, well, I teach people, but I constantly adapt.
Kate,
So this is way more, yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but there's a question about, are you chopping the stalks as well?
So great question. Thank you for asking that. No. So I pulled the sage off the stalks earlier. I also, what I meant to say before was that I do wash the sage. I get a lot of questions because the sage herbs come out of the package. They look clean, but they can develop tiny spores of mold, bacteria just hanging out in the grocery store, or just even if you get farmer's market fresh herbs or you grow them in your garden, it is always advisable to wash your herbs, even if they look clean. So I remove the stalk, and this is like a solid quarter cup here. I don't need this much. I will say I tend to take a recipe that calls for like 2 tablespoons of sage and I add an extra because I really love it. My family likes it too. But that's
What
up to you.
can you share the conversion to dried sage?
Yes. So it is Great question. For example, 1 tablespoon of fresh thyme, you would need half that amount in dried. The dried is concentrated in flavor. So if you have a recipe that's like a teaspoon of dried thyme, you would double it for fresh. I would think that the fresh would provide more flavor, and it does in a way. So if you're using dry sage, half the amount of fresh. Are there any other questions that have popped up?
There's a few about a recommendation for boxed or store-bought cornbread.
Yeah, the Whole Foods brand's actually really good if you have a Whole Foods near you. Honestly, for something like this, I don't think it matters because you're putting in so many other flavors. But I will say, I think the Whole Foods cornbread mix is excellent. We also have a local supermarket here that makes the cornbread. I think specifically for this because they serve like, or they sell like a big square cornbread. I think people buy it to make stuffing. So a lot of supermarkets have options like that. I think the Jiffy cornbread is fine. I think that's what Julia recommended, actually. I think I saw that somewhere in one of her recipes. Like Jiffy box cornbread is fine. So, you could go really traditional like that. But personally, I like the Whole Foods one because it's not too sweet. I don't like super sweet cornbread, especially going into a stuffing. And if you make your own cornbread, great. I am very much all about cutting corners when you need to. Making your own cornbread's wonderful, but when Thanksgiving comes, it's hectic. So if you can save yourself a step, I say go for it. All right, so I think we're getting ready to start cooking. So I'm gonna take my ingredients. I'm gonna move you guys over to my stove here. Let me see if that's helpful. Okay, so this is the type of pan I'm using to cook our ingredients for the stuffing. You're also gonna wanna turn your oven on to 350 if you have not already. So 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're gonna wanna heat the skillet over medium-high heat. And I was just grabbing my sausage here. If you're not using the sausage, skip this part, or you can add mushrooms instead. And I'm sorry I didn't say that ahead of time. I just saw the word gluten-free pop up. There you go. So if you're making from scratch, you can replace all-purpose flour with a cup per cup. Or Bob's Red Mill has a really good gluten-free cup per cup all-purpose flour gluten-free replacement. They also, I believe, I think someone, did I see?
Yes.
Bob's Red Mill, yeah. They're just an amazing company, high quality product, and the company's got a lot of integrity, so I like to recommend them. So now you're gonna wanna add your canola oil and your butter. And yes, I know sausage has a lot of natural fat in it. So if you feel like skipping that and just using the fat of the sausage, you may. But this helps lubricate your pan a bit. So once that starts to sizzle and your butter is melted, you're gonna add your sausage. And you're gonna wanna break that up with a spoon, a wooden spoon, or whatever you guys like to use for cooking.
Kate,
Yes.
what type of sausage?
Oh, great question. Really, honestly, anything that you like. You could use, if you don't eat pork, you can use a chicken apple. I think I just have sort of a standard, nothing particularly stands out about this sausage that I bought. Just bought it from an organic grocer. You could do Italian style sausage if you wanted that for flavor profile. It's got a little fennel usually, but you know, I would say really whatever floats your boat.
We have a comment from Karen saying that she's using Impossible sausage for vegetarian.
There, yes. Oh, that's great suggestion. Thank you, Karen. So yeah, there are amazing alternative meat alternatives. I worked at this summer camp over the summer in the Berkshires. It's a children's culinary camp, and the grounds are kosher, so we couldn't use a pork sausage. And we got this vegan sausage. I don't know where it came from, but it was so good, like none of us could tell. So there's some great vegetarian options out there. So as you can see, I'm breaking this up with a spoon. If you want to take a fork to it, I'm getting the pink out. You want to brown it. So we want to see, you're not just taking the pink out. You're trying to get a nice caramelization on the meat because that yields flavor. So I highly recommend you cook it, and so does Julia, until you get a nice brown on the sides of the meat, on the pieces of meat, I should say. We're not cooking a big steak, there are no sides. So I'm just gonna let that sit for a minute and caramelize. And while I'm waiting, I'm gonna bring over my onion and some salt and pepper. How much salt and pepper do you add? It is really to taste. So what I usually do is I add just a little bit, and then I go back and taste it before it goes in the oven.
Kate, can I ask
Yeah.
how
Yes, please ask questions.
all right. How long should the cornbread be in the oven to dry it out?
So if you need to dry it out, I would put it anywhere from 300 to 350 is solid, and for about 10 to 15 minutes. And why 10 to 15 and not 10 or 15 is because everyone's oven is so different. So I worked at, and I can tell you this because I work in so many different homes, that I put something in someone's oven recently that should have taken 35 minutes and it was done after 10. And their oven was just blasting hot. So, everyone's oven runs a little different in terms of heat. So I would say a safe bet is like, you make your cornbread that morning, you want to dry it out 10, 15 minutes on 350. You can also break it up the way I did and put it in the oven like this, and it'll dry it out a little bit. So that's a little trick of the trade there. So I'm starting to see some browning around the edges. So you'll want to get a small plate or bowl. And you can even use the bowl that you had the sausage in before if you want. Otherwise, if you're going to taste it later, you want to get a fresh bowl. So you're going to remove the sausage in a minute, and you're going to leave the oils in the pan. So the oil and fat will stay in the pan. So you can use your wooden spoon, or you can use something along these lines, some sort of slotted spoon. Again, I'm just going to give it another minute to brown it.
If this is a good time, we had a question about stuffing your turkey with this stuffing.
Yeah, I think Julia does that herself. We're not going to, because I'm not making a turkey, but Julia stuffs this into a turkey in her recipe. And yes. So what she recommends is you put it in the cavity, and then however of the turkey, and however long you're roasting the turkey for, your turkey your turkey 90 minutes, hypothetically. You'll fill your turkey cavity and then you will cook it for 90 minutes and then it is done. Some people have moved away from stuffing the turkey because they have found on occasion, and I don't want to scare anyone, but while the turkey itself is done, a lot of those juices leak into the stuffing inside, and sometimes it doesn't fully cook through. Does that happen often? Probably not. But I know a lot of chefs are sort of moving away from stuffing big birds. I still like it. I mean, a stuffed turkey is amazing.
So good.
So good. Oh, I'm trying to think, Lindsay, of one of the questions someone asked. Oh, what are my favorite Julia Child recipes? So you can see they're brown here. So I'm going to move those sausage pieces over to a clean bowl. And I chose the clean bowl because I'm going to want to taste this at some point for salt. My favorite Julia Child recipe is probably her beef bourguignon. I feel like that's a bit of an obvious answer, but it is so good. I love her coq au vin. Can you tell I am a meat eater? I am. Okay, I'm gonna grab my onions now. I'm gonna reduce my heat to medium just because my pan is so hot. So the onions go straight into that hot pan. I'm gonna season with some salt and pepper to taste. So you can be pretty generous, but I always like to say you can add more, but you can't take away. So while it's a generous seasoning, it's also somewhat restrained.
There was a question about fresh ground salt and pepper or kosher salt, Morton salt. Any
So
suggestions?
I am a kosher salt fanatic. I almost exclusively use it. If a recipe calls for a different kind of salt, I will use kosher salt. I do like, let me show you the brand I use. I use the Diamond Crystal because it's a little more fine than the Morton. And this is what you'll find in a lot of kitchens. I mean, really either, but I personally like the Diamond Crystal. If I'm going to go with sea salt, I like this brand of sea salt, Belline. It's more delicate. It's more fine. It's a nice finishing salt. And I like your fun finishing salt, you know, smoked sea salt, but I tend to be a kosher salt person. So when the onions start to sweat a bit, you'll be able to scrape those brown bits off the bottom. So again, if you're not using an alternative vegetarian product, if you started with your onions, you'll do the butter and you'll melt the butter with the oil and just add your onions. So you can see, oh, you can't see. Sorry, guys. Let me move this over. So you can see these are starting to brown nicely, mostly because of the brown bits I scraped off the bottom, not because they're caramelizing. So I'm going to give them a few more minutes and then I am going to add my celery. Oh, I've got to move things along, guys. I know we're on for an hour. I talk a lot. Sorry about that. So I'm going to bring these here and we're going to sort of jump around and start a little bit on our cranberry sauce because honestly, it's the easiest thing ever. And if you guys can go maybe 10 minutes past, I don't think we'll need more than an extra 10 minutes. So you want a green apple. If you don't have a Granny Smith, Sorry, I'm walking back and forth here. If you don't have a Granny Smith, don't sweat it. Use whatever apple you have. I wouldn't use a red delicious necessarily because it's very sweet. You want a little bit of tartness. But any sort of apple will work. It doesn't have to be green. So I love this tool. It is an apple core. If you don't have one, they're fun. You just kind of shove it into the middle of the apple and it pops everything out for you. But I'm going to show you how to cut it without an apple core because I feel like that's not your run-of-the-mill kitchen tool. So if you have one, go for it. If not, I'll show you how to cut this. All right. So my onions are looking pretty soft. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add my celery. And now that this is happening, we're getting really close to this all becoming an actual stuffing. So I'm adding this, I'm mixing it. It shouldn't be dry, but it's also not swimming in liquid. You're going to want to do this another 5 minutes. You're going to cook this for about 5 minutes. Your celery will turn nice and vibrantly green as it starts to cook, but you want to get it nice and soft. You want to, render some of its natural water out and soften it a bit. It is nice to have a texture variation within stuffing. Stuffing tends to be really soft. So if you prefer to have that crunch, you can stop now. I know some people are it's really important for them to have that texture variation, but I'm just going to keep cooking it. All right. So my apple, I'm going to start peeling this while we're standing here. Well, I'm standing here.
There was
overhead view. I know it's jiggly, guys. I don't have any stable equipment. I know some people have stuff on their wall. Let me try to show you again. I'm sorry. It's like being on a roller coaster. Hopefully that's better. I was about to invest in some good quality at-home equipment, and then the pandemic started to lift a bit, so I never bothered. So apologies for the roller coaster ride. All right, so I'm peeling this apple, and I'm just gonna remove the core and the seeds with a knife. So you can see this peeler is simply magical.
And Kate, there was a couple of questions before when the computer was over at your counter about what was the type of surface that you were chopping on?
Oh, before when we started, you mean?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you a little view of my kitchen from this angle. So that's actually just a cart that I set up for these classes. So that's not there all the time. Unfortunately, I don't have an island in my galley kitchen. So I normally chop like right over here. So I set that up just for tonight.
And was it, do you have a specific cutting board or that you like?
I do use a plastic cutting board. I'm trying to move more, towards wood since it's naturally antiseptic. It's better for the environment, but this one is just a big sort of utilitarian. I mean, it's large. My average cutting board is this big. This one is a little extra wide, and I use it for online teaching specifically just because it can fit more on the board.
That makes sense.
Okay, so here we've got our softened and nice and browned. Again, not caramelized, but a little bit brown. So we're gonna add this. You're gonna want a nice big bowl. So I'm gonna grab a bowl. Sorry, I'm out of view here. You're gonna want a nice big bowl, and you're gonna add your sausage and your vegetables to this bowl. And I'm telling you guys, the cranberry sauce takes like 5 minutes. It's the easiest thing ever. And I don't want to say it's an afterthought. It certainly is not, but it really is a very simple recipe. So while we're heading towards 7, I don't want you to panic. She hasn't got into the cranberry sauce. Okay, so you're gonna mix your meat if you're using or meat imposter meat or mushrooms. And then you're gonna add the sage. I'm gonna move you back over here, guys. I'm gonna move away from the stove again. So again, if you're new and joining a little late, very late, oven at 350. Okay, here we go. All right, so I have here, I'm gonna grab the recipe, just even though I know it, I wanna make sure I don't forget anything. Okay, so I'm gonna add sage this is about 3 tablespoons. If you wanna taste it now, before you add your egg, in a perfect world, you would let this cool to room temperature before you add the egg. So I might add the egg last, just so it gives it a second to cool. Pardon my crunching, guys. I think it needs a little salt. And since I'm a sage fanatic, I'm just gonna toss in a little more. As you can see, recipes are made to be unfollowed. All right, so now I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna add the bread. And I'm doing things a little bit differently than Julia's recipe just because my filling here has not cooled. And I don't want to add the eggs to a hot base because it will cook them. So first I added the breadcrumbs or bread chunks, the French bread. You can leave that out and just use the cornbread. Next up, I'm going to add the crumbled cornbread. You'll need a nice big vehicle for this. This feeds a crowd. So you'll need, all right, just getting these out of the way. I mean, my bowl's not even quite big enough. And if you're like me, you'll get in there with your hands. So our last ingredients are our egg and some broth. So again, if you're making a vegetarian version of this, you are going to want to use a vegetarian broth. Oh, I know some people have to log off shortly. Apologies for running a little long. So I've got my egg. So again, I would have added that to the vegetable meat base, but it was hot. I didn't have a chance to let it cool. And then a half cup of broth you can use. And I'm going in with my hands. You can use a vegetable broth. If you're doing a mushroom version, which again, Julia and Jacques' version this is their version. I just removed the mushrooms. So you can add those back in by just sauteing mushrooms and add a mushroom stock, make it really mushroomy. And you can buy sausages too that have mushrooms in them. So you can make it really mushroom forward, very umami. And I know I'm really digging in deep here. Some people sort of have an aversion to going in with their hands. You can wear gloves or just use a spoon. I've gone in with my hands because the bowl is a bit shallow for all this food. And I'm sort of scrunching it up a little bit. Okay. So now is when you would put it in the cavity of a turkey. It makes a lot. It may be more than you need for the cavity of a turkey. So whatever's left, you can put in a pan, a roasting pan, a roasting dish. And it's great for leftovers. I think one of the questions, Lindsay, you had sent was about repurposing leftovers. Oh,
Yes.
that is just that is speaking my language. So sorry, I should have had this pan out. Guys, I'm sorry for the quick clap to the pan. Let me grab this. So you'll probably want to oil your pan if you're baking it in a standard baking dish. 9x6 is probably good. You can put in a little oil spray, a little butter. I've got a little butter here. I'm just going to put a little on the bottom. Julia doesn't do this since her instructions are for stuffing the cavity of the bird, but I just don't want it to stick too aggressively to the bottom. So you can oil it, a little bit of butter, pour it in, and then you're going to bake. So yes, this will be more than you need for the cavity of a bird. If you're stuffing a bird, you want to really stuff it and pack it in. It fits in a 9x, that might be slightly bigger than a 9x6. That's more like a 12, I'd say 12 inch. There is about an inch available on top, and it will not rise. So this goes in the oven at 350 for 20 to 30 minutes. And obviously we will not be together when the timer is done. I'm going to set a 20-minute timer here.
Kate,
20 or, yeah.
There's just a question that came in about the stuffing. Mine looks like it has more sausage than cornbread. I checked and used the right amounts. Do you have thoughts on that?
I may have used a little extra cornbread. I actually didn't measure. I just used the whole thing. So that may be the reason.
Okay.
But I think when they do it, it is a very, I probably used about 7 cups there, maybe. Recipe says to cover with foil. Oh yes, it does. Thank you. Guys, this is, and guess what? I'm out of foil. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a little parchment. I'm going to place it on top. So I have all the hacks and tricks. I ran out of foil 2 days ago and forgot to purchase it. So if you don't have foil, you can just put a little bit of parchment on top. And that should work to seal in some of the heat, some of the moisture. So thank you for pointing that out. Okay, quickly, we're gonna pivot to the cranberry chutney. This is my little trick of the trade. I always put a towel under my cutting board. So, well, it helps with cleanup, but it also prevents my cutting board from moving all over the place. And then you can just flip it over, not dirty your countertop. I'm gonna wipe down my knife. So very quickly, I'm going to show you how to chop your apple. So I cut it in half and then into quarters. And then I use the side of my knife here to cut the core out. So you are losing a little bit more of the flesh. So for this, we're gonna want a lemon. You're gonna want a Granny Smith apple or some similar apple core and cut into about a 1/4 inch dice. So I'm cutting strips. So I have the pieces that I cut. The wedges, I'm going to cut those in lengthwise into strips and just cut those in half. How long does the stuffing cook? It's about 20 to 30 minutes, again, depending on your oven's heat. And if it's going in the bird, you'll cook based on how big your bird is and how long the bird needs. And I have a really good whole turkey recipe. I don't know if any of you have spatchcocked the turkey before. I will send Lindsay a video to send you guys. I highly recommend it. It helps you get a more even cook on the bird. Since it's flat, your white meat is less likely to dry out. I just made one with a client. He was wanting to make Thanksgiving dinner for his kids. Single dad, his kids are in college. It's his first time making Thanksgiving dinner. They're not originally from the States. He is not, but he wanted to learn how to make a very American dinner. So I taught him how to spatchcock a turkey. And this particular recipe has a great gravy too. So I'm happy to share that. And the bird came out amazing. But you can't stuff it because spatchcocking involves you butterflying it so it is open. So if you're going to stuff your bird, that is not the recipe for you. Okay, so you're going to need a bag of cranberries. Somebody did say that they were elsewhere in the world doesn't have cranberries. What could they use? There's nothing really to substitute for cranberries that would necessarily do the trick. I might recommend cherries. I think cherries would be good if you have access to fresh cherries, or even frozen cherries would be great. Raspberries could be nice. You can even use dried fruit, apricots, anything that's slightly tangy would make more of a chutney texture if you use a dried fruit than a fresh fruit. But cranberries are hard to substitute, I would say. But there are options out there. If you want to get creative, I'd love to hear somebody does something creative and substitutes your cranberries. I'm all about substitution. So if anyone has any great ideas, what does that say, Lindsay? A spatchcock turkey takes?
Yeah, it takes much less time to cook, and you can lay it on
Yes.
top of the stuffing during roasting.
Oh, yes, you could lay it on top of the stuffing. So I usually elevate it a little on a grate or a wire rack. You should a wire rack, and underneath I put the makings of a gravy. So I want all those juices to drip into vegetables, which then I use to make a gravy. So again, it depends on your intentions. If you're wanting those drippings for gravy, you don't want to put the stuffing underneath because it would absorb all those juices. But yes, you can put the stuffing. I'm coming out of focus. You could put the stuffing directly under the turkey. And spatchcock turkey does cut the time significantly and helps for an even cook. Okay, so we've got our cranberries. We have a cup of orange juice. You can use, I'm looking for my OJ.
It's right.
Oh, it's right in front of me. It's right in front of me.
There's,
Thank you.
there's a question that might be relevant right now.
Yeah.
Deborah asks about chutney. My favorite has orange liqueur and similar ingredients. The cayenne suggests a south of the border aspect, and I'm thinking about tequila. Do you have thoughts?
Huh. I mean, yeah, put in a splash of tequila. I don't know why Julie and Jacques put the cayenne in, honestly. Personally, it wouldn't be my choice to add a little spice to this. I think it's just because it's relish. It's not like a traditional cranberry sauce. I'm going to keep doing this, by the way, so we don't waste any. Not that it's a waste of time talking to you guys, but so we need to zest the lemon in a very particular way, not with a microplane. Julia wants you to use your vegetable peel to remove the peel of the lemon, and then she wants you to cut your lemon into wedges. So you're going to set these aside. So you're going to cut this into quarters and then cut each quarter into 1/4 of an inch. So each quarter you'll cut into 1 to 2 pieces. And obviously, if you've got a lot of pits, she doesn't say to pull out the pits, or the seeds, but where you can, pull out the seeds. So lemon into quarters, and then each quarter into a half or further into quarters or thirds. 1/4 of an inch slices. All right, so you're gonna set those aside. You've got your zest here. I'm just reminding myself, reading through, make sure I'm not missing anything. So you are going to want a pot. Doesn't have to be quite this big. I just like this sturdy pot. I'm a big fan of all plat. I've had these for 20 years and they're still amazing. Okay, so we're gonna add the orange juice and the cranberries to our pot. All right, we are going to add the apples. We're gonna set it over medium-high heat as well. And the lemon. So right now I would put it over heat. So if you're at home, put it over heat, but that requires me to move over there. So I'm just dumping everything in since we're running low on time. So you want to put this over medium-high heat. You're going to want to bring it to a boil. I also need my sugar. So it's a half cup of sugar. It's about a quarter teaspoon of salt. If you like it saltier, ultimately you can add your cayenne. It's just a quarter teaspoon. And I know I'm missing a little vinegar. So the vinegar is what makes it more of a chutney or relish. She toggles between the terms relish and chutney. She does have a recipe that is a relish, I believe, that caramelizes onions, or she cooks onions for like 30 minutes. So we're going to want 3 tablespoons of our vinegar. It can be a white wine vinegar, a champagne vinegar. This is very slow to come out. The new bottle here. I think I'm going to pop the top, guys. Here we go.
Are there sugar alternatives you would recommend?
You could just leave out sugar if you are sugar free. So I'm going to put this over medium heat. So apparently there's like feel free to chime in, folks. So there's stevia. I think that would be a little too strong. By the way, you want to cook that for about 5 minutes. You're going to cover it and bring it to a boil, and then stir it and cover and cook for 5 minutes. So sugar alternatives, you could use maple syrup or honey. If you are watching your A1C or glucose, you could leave it out entirely. There's the natural sweetness of the orange juice, which would work fine. Or just reduce the sugar by a quarter, even use a couple tablespoons. It'll be much more tart. As far as sugar replacements, something is coming on the tip of my tongue. Is it monk fruit?
That is.
I think that's a nice sugar alternative. If anyone has anything that is tried and true and they love, I'd love to hear. I often work with clients with dietary restrictions, and I tend to just monk fruit I've used before. I tend to just with my clients with more specific dietary needs, I try to avoid anything that would necessarily require sugar. So I'd probably avoid this recipe entirely. But I think you can just, yeah, I've used stevia before. If you're not used to the flavor, it can taste a little odd at first. Once your sort of brain grows accustomed to the flavor, you might grow to like it. I actually like it in my coffee. I try not to eat a lot of sugar myself because I struggle with blood sugar. Thank you, Dad. And so I cheat. I don't want to say cheat because I don't like the term cheat, but I will allow myself to eat whatever I want around the holidays. But on a day-to-day basis, I try not to overuse sugar or eat too much sugar. Let's see.
There was a question about, did you rinse the cranberries first? And
thank you. You saw me just dump them in. I did rinse them earlier. I'm so sorry I didn't mention that because I know, again, we're a bit pressed for time here. So I did rinse them. So I rinsed them and then I just put them on a towel to dry them. And that's it. So they don't require heavy duty washing because they grow in water. Okay, I'm just mixing it.
and
Nothing's happening yet.
Kate, did you say 5 minutes for the cranberries, or it's been
So,
about?
so once you reach a boil, I did jump ahead there. So once you reach a boil, so you're going to want to cover the top and bring it to a boil. And once it boils, you can turn the heat down to a simmer and cook it for about 5 minutes. And then you'll uncover it and reduce the heat even a little more and cook for an additional 5 minutes until it's really nice and thick. But I do like the idea of a splash of tequila with a cayenne. Is the liquid supposed to cover it? Let me bring you over and show you. So no, it's mostly, you've got your solid. So it depends on the pan you use. If you're using a wider pan than I am, your liquid may actually cover. Your cranberries. But I'm using a pretty, I would say this is about a 2-quart pan. And they do not, the liquid does not cover the cranberries.
How do they know when the stuffing is done?
So it's probably done. So obviously there's raw egg in it. So you want to make sure it's cooked all the way through. I would just say after 20 to 30 minutes. If there's steam coming out of it, you want your stuffing nice and soft, not dried out, hence why she covers it in foil. Should have bought the foil. So you just want it to feel hot all the way through and sort of steam when you remove the foil. So if your oven tends to run on the hot side, you can do 20 minutes. If your oven is more accurate to temperature, you can do up to 30 minutes. It's not going to dry out because if it's going to dry out if you leave it in the oven for an hour or two, potentially. But adding on 10 minutes, 20 versus 30 minutes, as long as it's covered, it's not going to be a deal breaker. It won't dry out because the steam is keeping it moist. Yes. And someone says there, temp over 165. And that's true for poultry as well. You want to test your bird when you're cooking it. If you do not have a meat thermometer and you're cooking a turkey, highly recommend you get one. And you're going to want to put the probe in the thickest part of the breast or the thigh and make sure you have an internal temperature of 165. Anything that goes too far above, you're getting into overcooked territory.
So
any other questions, guys?
A few questions about the lemons in the chutney and if rinds on it and what you do. Do you take the peels out?
So that's really up to you. So when I serve this, I just serve it all together in a bowl. I just turn that down, by the way, and I'm setting a 5-minute timer in my head by looking at the clock. So, sorry, I lost my train of thought, guys. Oh, the lemons. You can leave them in. They're pretty. They're really going to cook down a bit and get kind of jammy. But if it's really personal preference, you can pull those out if you don't like the looks of them. Just use some tongs and pull them out, or you can leave them and people can eat around it. But again, it's up to you if you want to leave them in.
And then let's see. There was a question earlier about how to store chopped leftover sage.
Sure. So I put it actually in a cloth or a paper towel. So you could just take the leftover, put it in. So this is fairly damp, but just slightly. or a dry one, you can put it in a paper towel like this, and then put it in a baggie or in a hermetically sealed Pyrex or Tupperware. Chopped sage will oxidize regardless of how you store it. So it is not going to look as beautiful as it did when you first chopped it. It will darken in color, but it's still completely usable. Honestly, I usually just shove it in a tiny one of these with a cover and call it a day. And I might throw it into something I'm making tomorrow. It's still completely good. Um, it tastes the same, but it will oxidize. Just FYI.
And then there's been a few
Oh, so
questions.
yeah, you can vacuum seal it if you have a vacuum sealer.
All right.
Okay, so I've got burst cranberries, and now I've got sort of a medium low heat, and I'm gonna go 5 minutes again. So I'm checking my stuffing, guys. I'm sorry I'm in the background over here. I'm actually just gonna taste it. So 20 minutes was perfect for my oven, especially because I did not cover it.
There was one about how long does it take the chutney to get to the right consistency. So I think that was a bit of what you were just saying. And then somebody just asked if you could
Can I? So mine is not there yet.
oh, somebody's trying
So
theirs.
it's
Said this chutney is delicious.
so it is mine is still pretty watery. Um so again, so Julia says to cook it 5 more minutes after you remove the top. So what you're doing is bursting the cranberries, and that helps to extricate all those juices. And then you're just cooking it down. And it's honestly, if you want it a little thinner, I hate to say watery, but if you want it more liquidy, alternatively, if you want it really, really thick like a jam, you can just continue to cook it until all the juices evaporate. So really a personal preference. I think I'm going to cook mine a little longer than Julia recommends because I want it to be really thick. Also, please note that once you take that off the heat, it will congeal a little bit because there's pectin in cranberries and natural pectin. Plus, you've added the sugar. So once it cools, it will start to thicken like a syrup, which you will not see while it's on the heat. So if you want it really, really, really thick, cook it maybe 10 minutes until you evaporate some more of that liquid. Oh, sure. So I'm just going to let mine cook a few minutes, but you are supposed to cool the chutney before you serve it. So at least at room temperature, it can keep in the refrigerator. If you cool it overnight, it's just going to naturally thicken. Like if you make a custard and it seems more watery and you put it in the fridge and then it stabilizes, that will happen. So mine looks like this. Again, a little more cornbready than maybe some of yours. I'll do a spoonful. Spoonful of stuffing helps the medicine go down, as they say.
This is the point in our webinar where I wish that I was able to cook along. It looks delicious.
It's really good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make some chicken tonight to go with this. I know my poor teenager is probably starving. Aw, my husband just said, poor thing.
So we have folks sharing the Molly O'Neill wild mushroom bread pudding. We also did, so I will link it in the follow-up email. So please look out for that. Stephanie has asked, what's the author of the gratin potatoes recipe again?
Oh, Oh, so no way, he's already a teenager. Yes,
I know.
he's in high school now. Um, the Tyler Florence recipe, the gratin is Tyler Florence.
Awesome.
So again, Julia's is great too, and you can't go wrong with any Julia recipe. But Tyler's recipe is very streamlined. Um, I guess it's technically not a gratin; it's a dauphinoise because you don't pre-cook the potatoes. That is the difference between those two. A gratin, technically, you boil the potatoes, you boil the sliced potatoes. In Tyler's recipe, you do not. So that would be a dauphinoise. And pardon my French accent; it is terrible. Any
Did
other questions? I'm happy to take them all.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I know we're over, so I want to be respectful of your time and everyone else's, but there's
Thanks.
a great question from Denise about any tips on how to heat it up if we were to make it ahead of time and how high to heat the oven and for how long?
The stuffing, you mean?
I I think so, but Denise, chime in if you meant the chutney, because that served at room temperature?
Yes, so you can serve that room temperature.
Yes, the
So if you're
stuff.
making the stuffing in advance, I mean, you can microwave it if if necessity calls for a microwave. If your oven is tied up, you can just otherwise cover it up and put it in the oven at maybe 300. You probably don't want to go over 300 because then you can risk drying it out. But just store it, let it cool to room temperature in whatever vessel you use, and then cover it with foil. Take it out, place it in the oven at, I'd say, 300. Or if you're cooking something else, just throw it in the oven. I just wouldn't go beyond 350 is like the max to reheat it. But this is absolutely something you can and should make in advance. Um, but yeah, I'm a big fan of getting things done ahead of time so you're not stressed out on the holiday. But I would say 300 for 20 minutes, maybe.
Okay, that's nice. I popped
Thank
Kate's recipe
you.
in chat so everyone
So,
can.
guys, you can always contact me as well if you have any follow up questions. I love talking to Smithies.
I will include all of the links to connect with Kate on social and her webpage in our follow-up email. It was so lovely spending Julia Child Day with all of you, and especially Kate. I want to thank Kate.
Oh,
Um,
hold that thought. One more,
okay,
one
all
more
right.
moment, one more moment. So, mine is looking nice right now, mostly reduced.
Ooh. I see
So, you
clapping.
could even continue cooking that if you want to get more of a rich, syrupy chutney, or you can stop right there. Again, it will congeal, and I'm using that word lovingly because I know it's not everyone's favorite word, but it will congeal lovingly um, as it cools.
Thank you for
Thank you,
showing
guys.
and sharing. There were quite a few questions about the chutney, so that's nice to see what it looks like. It's beautiful. I love the vibrant colors. I'm definitely going to try it. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I actually like the canned cranberry sauce.
Do not be. I love it.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk to professional cooks too, and they're like, we love McDonald's, we love Popeyes, we love canned cranberry sauce, we love canned tomato soup. I
It
mean,
reminds me of my
it is
grandma.
just good. It's yummy. I love the canned stuff for my leftovers. Actually, I will make a
Oh,
leftovers sandwich, and I like to
yes.
mix that with a little bit of mayo, make like a cranberry mayo.
Oh, that's wonderful. And we have gotten through a lot of questions. I know there was a lot more that came in through the chat. So thank you all for your interest and for being here today. And I'm sorry if we didn't get to every question. We will. I see questions about links, and we'll definitely be linking things in the
And again,
email.
you guys can email me if there is anything specific, um, any specific questions at all, or just feedback, any of the above. feel free to reach out.
I'm loving seeing all of the gratitude in the chat, and thank you for
Aw,
evening and a wonderful cooking demonstration. This is so much fun, and we saw some folks cooking along with family members and kids, and I love that. So thank you for bringing your family into this as well. This was so fun to host. Bon appetit.
yes, bon appetit.
Uh,
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.